Welcome to Tools for Time Traveling, the podcast equipping creators to build the future today. Because the future isn't something that just happens to you, it's built by creators of all stripes.
Every episode, we'll talk to a creative industry expert to get a behind the curtains look at the past and present of our creative industries, so you can gain that unfair advantage as you build out the future of your career. This season, we're focusing on music creators and providing strategic tools that help them navigate this often disrupted industry as they take control of their future.
All right, now let's jump into the episode.
It was almost like we were saying, we're the record industry. We're too big to fail, which, now we look back and go, boy, what a mistake. But there were some of us that knew it was a mistake in 1999 when all this went down and all this conversation, was happening. So what we could have done differently was we could have got in front of it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tools for Time Traveling, the podcast equipping creatives to build the future today. I'm Gavin, creative director in advertising, but I make a bunch of content, just try to do the thing, shoot, edit, whatever I need to do. Desmond, what up?
Listen, man, are you gonna play the humble game today? Because I'm not having it. Because for those of you listening, this gentleman just wrapped a commercial with Spike Lee and what's Tyler's last name?
Tyler Mitchell.
And Tyler Mitchell, first black photographer to get the cover of Vogue. Like, come on, man. Like, don't be the humble advertiser today. Like, you big shot creative director, fam.
Thank you very much.
I saw the commercial last night. I mean, I've seen it several times, but just to see it pop like that, it's like, yo, this is my guy, man. Like, it's just running things.
Yeah, and Microsoft Des, what up?
Hey, man, we gotta keep that on the low. Yeah, but it is really fantastic, man, to be working in like the future of work and working with such an influential company that's like driving change and has the capacity to shift things, based on my insights, my team's insights, and what we're developing. So it's fantastic. Yeah. And what's great about this is like I'm a futurist in my day job, and someone might think, oh, futurist, like you got to work in tech or you got to be an engineer or something like that. But like that's why we started this thing, man. Like everyone can be a futurist, and I would say artists more than anyone are like most equipped to do that, and in some ways are already doing that, but just don't necessarily have the terminology for it. So it's nothing special that I do this for a day job. Like you all can be in the same space and kind of influencing your future in the same way. So much in the same way that Gavin said to himself, like, hey, in the future, I'm going to work with this caliber of people. I'm going to do like this type of work. And as a creative, like he manifested that. I just remember like I saw a really dope video of Dame Dash doing something similar, and just talking about like, how creators can like, forecast the future or like bring it to them.
That's tools for time travel right there.
That's it, man.
Yeah,
that's
all right.
From Dame Dash.
Exactly. All right. So look, all right. I'm seeing it in my head. I think we should have a segment, right? That we start. Okay. We start every episode this way. All right. Y'all are seeing how the sausage is made right now. It's the segment is going to be called "We're All Futurists," because when I hear what you just said, basically, you're telling me that like I'm a futurist, like me, Gavin, I'm a futurist too, which I wouldn't necessarily categorize myself as that. But what I hear you saying is what you do in your day to day. You know a lot of the terminology and a lot of the thinking. However, there's a lot of people, Dame Dash included, but artists, musicians, and things like that who rap about, sing about, sort of like theorize by sort of like visualizing the future and then manifesting it today. And that's essentially all being a futurist is, which, I didn't understand when Desmond was talking to me about Janus cones and strategic foresight thinking. Right. It all seemed very far away. But the more I think about, what different artists do, what different musicians do and make possible, through their art forms, they're really reaching into the future, and just doing it today, which is just moving us forward as a creative society. So yeah, to your point, that Dame Dash link, that video is perfect, because it's kind of like the perfect summation of what we're trying to do, like going into the future and bringing back the things that are going to help us execute that today.
Okay, so what I'm able to do is, if I want something, I go into the future in my brain, which is powerful, and I visualize exactly what I want. So I'm there, I'm in my future. And then I think about every single thing I need to do to make that happen, and every single thing that could stop that from happening, or what I need to avoid. Then I go right back. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like I was just in the future, thinking about watching myself on my television network. So because I do that, that means I have to think what would be the worst case scenario, and then I have to think what would be the best case scenario. And then I eliminate every single thing that I think could happen, which I call art detecting. And then I put everything and every single attitude and person around me in my vision that's gonna make me get to what I want. And also, I try to get the people around me to think about the same exact vision. So you can inspire people and all that energy is focused on one thing that they can visualize in their head, then it becomes a tangible reality. And I know that to be a fact because it's happened. It's a fact for me.
It's a good example to me as well, because, you know, Dame Dash may not be like, you know, heavily influential in this very moment right now. Like he's not all over your TV screens right now, but like he launched so many careers and was pivotal in so many like culture shifting and game changing, you know, movements and endeavors from, you know, obviously everything he did with Jay-Z, you know, so Rockefeller, then Rockaware, Rock Films, and, you know, they put out like some pretty cool movies under that umbrella. Some duds, but like some really good movies as well. And then, you know, beyond that, like, you know, Dipset, Cameron, like bringing him into the fold, everything that kind of, you know, launched when they were brought on to Rockefeller. And then obviously like believing in Kanye and pushing him forward. And then like, that's just a whole new tree itself onto like creative processes and just like changing that fashion, film, music, all of that. Exactly. So yeah, if it has worked for Dame to this extent, to have accomplished so many things and influenced so many things, I think it just bears like further consideration for you as a creative to think like, all right, well, how can I do this? How can I incorporate this into my process and my planning of things, and what influence and what impact might I have going forward? Beautiful.
It's amazing. All right. Yeah. We're all futurists. You heard it here first.
Exactly. And I think that tees us up well. We decided that we were going to tackle the music industry, and, you know, Dame Dash is a great example of a futurist, that, you know, people may not think of him in that light initially, but that's what he was doing. So let's talk a little bit more about music. I love music. You love music. I was a DJ back in the day. So we gotta bring it, man. We gotta make sure the musicians, the producers, the rappers, the singers, everyone in that ecosystem, you know, we got to do right by them and make sure that they're getting the insights that they need.
Yeah, Georgia State Radio, stand up, stand up, Panthers, stand up.
But hopefully some of them are listening.
I know, right? But you know, I think besides that though, and let me know what you think. I feel like the past of music and, you know, the music industry, if you will, and just like the state of how we grew up, you know, in relation to the music industry, it feels like really far away now, right? Especially in this digital era, right? Like everything's sort of driven by those algorithms and metrics. And I'm sure I'm not saying anything like new or groundbreaking, but I think when you do thing like when you lay COVID on top of it, now we're just like expounding on this exponentially, and that's sort of like thrown everyone for a loop. And I think we're seeing sort of light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to COVID in general, right? Like people are getting the vaccines, people are starting to announce tour dates and things like that. But it did expose a lot in the music industry. It exposed a lot of what these record executives' true intentions are. It exposed a lot of what these artists are really thinking. And these labels and artists are really having to figure out what's up and what's down in real time.
Yeah, it's been a lot, man. Like the past 25 years, like the whole industry, everybody's on their heels. Like you had tapes to CDs, right? And then once you get in that range, it's like, oh, we bootlegging CDs now. And then it was like, oh, we don't need CDs. We just download off Napster, load up the MP3 player, the iPod, whatever. Yeah. And then it was like, oh, we streaming now. But every stream is like 1/200th of a penny.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, compared to like, you're right, right. Compared to before, if you sold a single or sold something like that was like dollars in your pocket.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is different. But this is kind of like, it's kind of anecdotal. You know what I'm saying? Like we gotta bridge that gap and we gotta dig in and do that real research. So, you know, part of our goal here is to like, you know, bring in some of those industry experts, bring in some of those historians that can give us a past, present, and future look at the music industry, and then take all of their insights and start building a roadmap. So putting the futurist hat on, the best way to do this, it's called a Janus cone, or that's kind of like the framework to view it.
Okay, and just before you get too far into it, please explain to me and to the listeners what a Janus cone is.
Yeah. Okay. So a Janus cone, we'll start off visually, like that's easiest for everyone. Imagine you're looking at a bow tie, right? So you've got like kind of this like knot in the middle, that's like, you know, middle ground or whatever, and then it kind of expands out to one side and expands out to the other side. Yeah. So, you know, on the left side of things, you've got the past and history, and like you're charting all of these events, all of these things, like a timeline that kind of leads into the present and where we've arrived at today. Okay. So every one of those historic things has kind of led to this present moment, which is like the center. And then the other side of that kind of opens out this way toward the right, that's the future, you know? And the closer we are to the present, like the more focused we are, the more we're able to understand what it is. And the further out you go, it kind of spreads out because there's more uncertainty as you're moving away. So that's how you kind of look at a Janus cone. It's the way to look at hindsight and understand how hindsight has shaped and influenced the present. And then you apply some insights on what you're experiencing right now, what you're looking at, what's going on, what's kind of emerging. And then you use all of that information to start to forecast and look at the future with foresight. So you're going hindsight to insight to foresight. Okay. And that's what a Janus cone allows you to do. Okay.
So right now, basically, we are on the open end of the bow tie. And the hindsight end of the bow tie. That's right. And that's where we are going to input all of this perspective that we're going to be gathering for the beginning. Okay.
Yep.
One of those figures that I think we can start with, we can start close to home, is my dad,
Demmette Guidry.
You know, he's been in the music industry for decades. He was a VP of marketing at Columbia Records in the 90s and early 2000s. And you know, that's really when the music industry was at its height, at its peak. I'm talking like millions of dollars on music videos. You know, Puffy was on
the Hype Williams joints.
Yeah. It was a crazy. Like imagine today, 2021, people spending millions of dollars on music videos that. Just in case you didn't know, those were like, that was standard budget. You know, these record labels, essentially they were able to do this because these labels were charging whatever they wanted to for CDs. So you know, they had a monopoly, so they could set the price. So you know, I remember paying, you know, upwards of like $20 for a single CD. I'm sure you probably remember the same.
Man, that's like 2 months of Spotify now.
Yeah, at least. At least that's if you're not on the family plan.
Hey.
But you know, that's coming off of like the CD business was like it was a $1 billion business. And artists were really making money off of the music that they were making. And of course this is before Napster, before iTunes, and the iPod. You know, it's essentially what people in the industry would call the good old days, for sure. But yeah, you know, so again, my dad was in the industry at that time, and he had a big hand in breaking artists like Nas, LL Cool J, Destiny's Child. I'll for if you're watching the video, I'll throw up a little picture of me with Beyonce, the Fugees, Lauryn Hill, etc. List goes on. Basically, like if they were hot in the 90s and early 2000s, he had a hand in their career somehow. And so it has been really awesome to see what he's doing with his career now, with all of that knowledge of the past and just black music in general. He's now working with fellow industry heavy hitter Michael Malden. For those of you who know Jermaine Dupri, is Jermaine Dupri's father. Also very instrumental in the music in hip hop in the 90s and 2000s as well. So him and Michael Malden are working together and have created Black American Music Association, or BAM as they call it. With the mission to preserve, protect, and promote the legacy and the future of authentic Black American music as an indigenous art form. So it sounds really heady and it sounds really cool, honestly. But they're doing some really cool, legitimate things, like they're putting a Black music walk of fame right here in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So so my dad is very instrumental in bringing all of that stuff to light as well.
Yo, I really love, kind of that mission that you were describing: preserve, protect, and promote the legacy and the future. So this is a perfect way to kick it off. I was just talking about the Janus Cones, and that combines the legacy or history with the future and what comes next within music. Yeah,
and it's cool because him and I talk so much about he's a big reason I got into marketing and then advertising. Still being a fan of music, him still being involved in music. We talk about the future of music quite a bit, way before, us thinking of this podcast together. So yeah, I think it's really just the first place, or the best place to start. And so, I mean, really, y'all are just going to be getting a good insight into some of the gems that he be dropping on me when we talk about some of this stuff, honestly.
Over the dinner table.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, cool. So with that, first off, within this conversation with Demmette Guidry, let's clarify what we mean by the music industry. He gave us a few really helpful ways to think through this. So there's the record industry and then the music industry, and they're not always the same thing.
Monopolies. When I was in the music industry, and when the music industry, or I should say the record industry, because I separate record companies from music industry. So let me qualify that first and foremost. So the record industries are the middlemen. The music industry is thriving and will continue to thrive. Music is being consumed more than ever. It's music and air. Music and air. So music is always going to thrive. So when we talk about where we are now, the record companies and the record labels, and we'll speak first about the major labels, because I think that's what you're more concerned with. So from a major label perspective, with them being the middlemen now, they've done a yeoman's job the last 10 years in recreating their business model.
All right. So now that we have that context, which is really helpful, moving forward, we're going to be talking about the record industry and record companies for the purpose of this process and this project. So those are the major players in all of this. And then the music industry, as he was explaining, that's just the big picture. That's what we all kind of experience collectively.
Yeah. I mean, one of the most enlightening things that I think is the veil has sort of has started to be pulled back on, especially for the general public, right? That we're a part of. We sort of started to see the positioning of record labels as middlemen, but it is really nice for us to be able to have that context, really straight from the horse's mouth. To me, it makes me feel not such a conspiracy theorist, right? When I'm just oh man, these record labels out here, blah blah blah. It's no, I mean, look, they are just middlemen. But the thing is, though, back in the day, that was fine. Record labels being middlemen was okay because they were providing actual value. They were providing real value to these artists, to the music, to just the world at large. And so there was like two major ways is that we talked about, but you know, they were actually like developing artists, right? So they were actually taking their resources, and developing these artists, whether it be their sound or their craft or their look or, you know, whatever it may be, they were actually developing them to make a better product. And then they were also they were distributing their music further than the artists could themselves. So it actually allowed these artists to make a living off of music, off of making music, which is just really not the case today. And a big reason is because of the disruption that technology brought to the music industry, to the record industry. When tech disrupted, so this is Napster, this is iTunes, you know, all of these peer-to-peer sharing networks and entities, they exposed what these record labels really were, and that is middlemen, but middlemen that can no longer provide that same value.
They, even though they still position themselves as record labels, they are really intellectual property owners. You know, they own IP and they own copyrights and they have catalog and deep catalog. And most of those record labels have always thrived off of their catalog and their deep catalog and the copyrights they own, et cetera, et cetera. So over the last 10 years, when technology forced record labels to make a change, because the record labels back when technology, you know, when peer-to-peer sharing came out in the late 90s, when the record business, to your point, Gavin, was at its peak of profits, as Black music and as hip hop music, you know, began to take over pop culture, there were all-time highs in terms of profits. And then here comes peer-to-peer sharing. And we as record labels, to hold on to our power and our position, we decided we would begin to sue our own consumers because they were violating our copyrights and they were violating our ownership and choosing our masters and all these things that we've lobbied for, you know, literally a century to put laws in place that would benefit us.
So even though like they were still positioning themselves as record labels, they were really just intellectual property owners, if you think about it. So they were really just operating off of their deep catalogs. So when peer-to-peer sharing hit at the height of the record industry, you know, instead of being able to adapt well, they had to essentially shift to suing their own customers. They went to suing their own like customers like you and me who are really just you know, keeping up with the times. We love the music. We're keeping up with the times. This is how I get my music. They were starting to sue people like you and me for doing just that over copyrights because that's all they had left. That's all they didn't have any actual value that they were bringing. So they were like, "Oh, we got these copyrights, bet. Okay, then I'm going to come get mine." And you know, them really spoiling all the fun. Really it's to keep control. They had to keep whatever control they had. And that really only left them with one option, and that was exploitation.
And so the technology companies came in and the tail began to wag the dog, as I like to say. And the, you know, technology companies, specifically Apple and iTunes, when, you know, the iPod came around, they began to dictate what the pricing was, the structure, you know, the distribution chains. You know, we had a supply chain set up, and here comes, you know, another a variation of a supply chain that we were no longer in control of. So what the record companies have done since then, you know, the last 20 years, but the last 10 years specifically, they've repositioned themselves to try to, you know, take advantage of them being the rights holders. And in the midst of that, we went from 6 companies down to 3 companies, again, in the environment where all the media companies are consolidating. So they began to create what was the 360 deal. And the 360 deal said, if I invest in you and I sign you to my label and I provide the resource to develop your talent. I provide the resource to create your content. Um, I want to be able to not only exploit your content, but I want to participate in every revenue stream as a result of this content that I paid for, driving other verticals that you may be involved in. Back in the day prior to that, prior to 2000, 2002, there was always a separation of church and state. And what I meant by that in the music industry, record labels were just that. They were record labels. They would advance money, create the record, market the record, put the record out, and they would balance their profits against the revenue of the record. And they would pay a royalty to the artist, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in an environment where the technology companies are now running the business, it cuts down, on their profits because now they're dictating the profit margins. It's going to be 99 cents for a single. That was the first thing. Or it's going to be $1.29 for a single. We're going to dictate the prices, where before our profit margins were huge. We were selling CDs for $20. At the end of the day, it may have cost me $1.35, all in. And so that, so we went through that period. So the money grab was, let's take ancillary rights. Let's do the 360 deal. So if I blow you up and you turn out to be Beyonce, I'm eating off the Pepsi commercial. I'm going to eat off your touring. I'm going to eat off your publishing, where before all those things were separate. Your verticals were your verticals. Here's my record company, but I also have a touring agency. I've got a television agent. I did my own publishing deal. I've got my own merchandising deal. And now all of those rights, when an artist goes to sign with a major record label, because they've repositioned themselves as rights holders in content companies, it now allows them to eat on all of those revenue streams from said artists.
Yeah.
So for the record companies, it's interesting because they're kind of transforming into like a stock trader model or like a VC model where they're just like, oh, let me invest in this startup and that startup and we'll just throw something. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. So it's basically like, that's crazy. I hadn't really thought about it this way before, but it's really just like, because, obviously with like crypto booming right now, it's really just like, cool, throw it at the wall. I'll see what sticks, right? Like I'm going to invest in this for a little bit. Yep. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to dump it. If it does, I'll hold it. But it just goes basically from like a real it goes from like developing to just like trading, stock trading.
Sticks. For the labels, it's a great risk. It's a low risk because you're not paying in advance on those other streams. Some artists and some lawyers that are savvy, they manage to, get a little bit of the money up, get extra advance for all of these different things. But by and large, they're getting them for free. So if the artist doesn't blow up, they never have to exploit those revenue streams. And because they don't even have the expertise, to exploit them, they kind of get let off the hook. And then along comes a Cardi B or something like that. And then they make all their money back for the other 20 that they threw up against the wall and it didn't stick because they're able to eat on all of her sponsorship deals, her touring, everything. So she becomes, sort of like a corporate artist.
So like the problem that we end up with when you're treating artists like stocks that you're just trading and dumping if it doesn't work, but holding maybe because maybe it'll work. The problem that this develops is sort of twofold. So the first is that there's no money and no development. And we've talked a little bit about that before, but that's kind of obvious. Like there's, they don't have to invest a ton of money into you. So you're not making very much money. And then of course there's just no development into your personal craft. So then like as an artist, not only your craft, but just the craft overall of just music in general, it's not as developed. And then the second piece of this, of treating artists like stocks, is the only real revenue streams end up coming from, performing, right? So, I think we've been hearing, even, just general public, even people who aren't super into the ins and outs of the music industry, I think they understand that most artists these days, they make most of their money from touring, like, touring, performing, things like that. But we've seen how fickle that can be. Just like, so with COVID, right? We have a worldwide pandemic. People aren't able to go to shows. Then that revenue stream dries up like this.
Yep.
Because they sign their rights away. So you end up not being as flexible as you would be able to, because you've signed all your rights away. You've signed away, Desmond, like you were saying before, you signed away TV, you signed away, just a lot of the different verticals that before 360 deals from these labels, you used to be able to take those verticals and just spread them out in different places, essentially not having all of your eggs in one basket. Mm-hmm. But, something like, the COVID pandemic has shown how having to have all of your eggs in one basket is super detrimental to the artist. And it's crazy because they're requiring you to sign your rights away for all of these different revenue streams, all of these different verticals. But these labels aren't the actual, opinion. They're not the actual subject matter experts. They don't have the actual ability or knowledge on how to create these new revenue streams for you. These aren't the best, so they own everything that you're going to do as far as your endorsements and your TV and your, fashion and just what you can and can't do. But they're not the experts in any of those fields.
They're playing like an old game, like an outdated model. With all of those things. It's just like, here's how this used to be, or here's what we think it is, as opposed to like the vanguard and driving things forward. And it didn't even have to be like that.
That's the crazy thing. It doesn't it didn't need to be this way. It totally does not need to be this way.
It was almost like we were saying, we're the record industry. We're too big to fail, which, now we look back and go, boy, what a mistake. But there were some of us that knew it was a mistake in 1999. When all this went down and all this conversation, was happening. So what we could have done differently was we could have got in front of it. You guys may remember the Zoom. Y'all remember that? That was a Microsoft. That was an attempt because we had a gentleman, he was over at Universal. He made an attempt for our entire industry because Universal has and always had, even back in the 90s, the biggest market share. So he went to a technology company and said he was the only company, Universal, having the biggest market share, the biggest catalogs, everything. He did not give any of his rights over to Steve Jobs. They came and made a deal with Sony. They came and made a deal with Warner, and I'm trying to think of his name. He's not in the industry anymore. But he was the chairman of Universal, and he decided, I'm going to hold out. And he went to Microsoft and said, I will exclusively give you all of our catalog and content. And he asked for a royalty from every Zune sold. That's what we should have done with Steve Jobs.
The Zune case study is super interesting, not because you just started at Microsoft and are big dog at Microsoft now, but because I think people, the Zune nowadays are kind of like a meme, or like even if you I think for the super technologically inclined, some people might still have their Zunes, it was a feat of technology for sure. But I think it's so interesting to look at it in this context, man, and just see how if we would have taken this, to me, this was an attempt to be proactive instead of reactive, right? Instead of suing, instead of doing these things, we could have been proactive. And if more people would have gotten down with the Zune, instead of sort of, just doing what was convenient, or doing what everybody else was doing in order to hold on to the profits and things like that, the rise and fall of the Zune is a case study of what could have been, and really what it would have been is better for artists. They would have maybe been able to get a fair shake, and also the big three wouldn't have had to settle for Spotify profits, which is what ended up happening.
As all of these streaming services started to pop up and the battles were starting with rights, because again, the technology has far outpaced the legislation for the technology when it comes to copyright, et cetera, et cetera. But it was Sony, Universal, and Warner, the only three that are left, went from a big six to a big three. Those are the guys that invested in Spotify. And that's the piece of the puzzle a lot of people don't talk about. So here you have an industry that's hurting, that went from record profits to record lows, and they're trying to figure out, what are we going to do? Nothing's changing. Okay, how can we take the power out of iTunes and folks like that, right? That have this download business, that have this business that, the kids have bought onto this idea of music being portable. That genie's out of the bottle. It ain't going back. You know what I mean? We have our relationships with terrestrial radio, but satellite radio's gaining, internet radio's gaining, streaming's growing. So they came together to invest in something they could own, though they never claimed they owned it. In fact, you didn't really hear much about it until Spotify went public, and then the label started pulling their money out, and everybody was going, wait a minute, So they anointed Spotify of all of the market. The market was flooded, as you guys may remember, with startups. Everybody's trying to do it. They anointed Spotify, gave Spotify the rights, because again, this is a rights game. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have the rights of Columbia, of Sony, Warner, and Universal, then what do you have? All of the independents. Nobody's going to pay you $9 a month. They're going to pay you $9 a month to hear the stuff they grew up on, and hear the new hottest stuff that's on the major labels, unfortunately.
So right, yeah, and it's such a small amount of money now, where like the bulk of the money was coming from selling the music before, and now it's streaming. Like that's tiny. So artists are just handicapped, and really all they have is, like in the modern age, all they have is touring to make the bulk of their money. And if you look at the past year, done, dead. With COVID, like that's out of here. So it's been a terrible stretch for artists, and I think now is the time to start thinking about, like, all right, how do I pivot? What's next?
Yeah, because I think people might be like, okay, well, like it doesn't matter because we're good, like COVID's over, or whatever. But like, yeah, but shouldn't that just show you how much things need to be changed? Yeah. If something that's out of our control can completely stop industries, then don't we need? Isn't there some change that needs to occur, basically?
Right.
And then also, even before COVID, it wasn't that good for artists, anyways. Only making money off one vertical consistently is not a good way to be.
The implication of this type of model, and if I can bring it kind of today, this type of model works in a non-COVID environment, because 9 times out of 10, now that it's about it's driven, act driven versus artist driven, those acts just want to be famous. They're not in this for a sustained career. An artist is, because an artist probably since they were 3 years old, this is what they've been working on. This is their purpose. Where if you got an act that's just coming in and and he's got a hot record on the internet, or he spent 30 grand making his social media look real, and it's all inauthentic, and he goes in there, he has a chance to become famous, not make any sustained money, because that sustained wealth is going to come from your copyrights. And prior to COVID, it was about touring. So that's how the labels, that was their sales pitch to these artists or these acts. You come in, we're going to blow you up, and then they go make their money. Because what has happened in the touring business is it has also constricted, monopolies. Live Nation, if you're Where else can you go? Maybe AEG, but the cat's meow in our business now is to get a hit record, get with Live Nation, and tour.
Yeah, because and I mean, it makes so much sense because remember, like when COVID first started, there were a lot of artists trying to get out of their deals. You remember that, like Taylor Swift, probably the biggest one, Meg Thee Stallion, also. Like you start to see it's like, yo, okay, wait, I'm not selling out arenas anymore. Where's my money coming from? Like, I need to take a look at my deal. I need to restructure. I need to get out of it. I need to whatever. So like all these huge artists that you've never heard of having issues with their labels now all of a sudden start to have issues because they really took that last the last sort of like bastion of like consistent revenue from these artists.
Yeah.
So like with all this saying, it's pretty bleak, kind of like it feels kind of bleak, but like there's gotta be a better way, right?
Yes, absolutely, and that's ownership.
Yep.
Like artists have to figure out a way to hold on to their rights and not sign that over to labels when they sign their deals.
Well, again, going back to the idea that it's all about rights management, right? I think if we held on, and I'm talking about we as a community, because I got to talk in, where I'm at, Gavin. I got to talk in community terms. I think if our creatives held on to their rights, they would bring the labels to their knees because this rights management, maintain your ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Because you created in your bedroom doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Because you are not proficient as a musician and you use some of the technologies like Arcade or Fruit Loops or whatever, and you're just putting other people's works, you're sampling them and putting snippets together and doing whatever, it still has value.
Yeah, and the point about ownership and maintaining that ownership, he brings up a great point here, and it really all centers around leverage, right? Like, so artists these days are super creative, super nimble. So like, there's this whole new, like, whether you call it SoundCloud rap or bedroom pop or like whatever.
A bedroom pop, that's new. I haven't heard that.
That's new? Maybe that's an advertising thing. But like, basically there's all of these like really creative artists or just creators, probably wouldn't call themselves artists, right? But they're making all of these like creative outputs in their bedrooms. So this could be music, art, clothes, whatever. They're learning how to do it. They're doing it, at a lower barrier to entry. But the issue though is because it was so easy, quote unquote, like it's not easy. Obviously you have to be incredibly skilled. You have to put a lot of time into it. But it feels for them like easy to make. Like, I made this in my bedroom. I made this I made this at my friend's house. I made this in the basement. I feel like people are not valuing these creative outputs for what they really are. And what they really are, it's leverage at the end of the day. So because like you've just done in your bedroom, in your basement, at your mom's house, in the car, on your iPhone, whatever it is, you've just done what these record labels are used to spending millions of dollars to do.
Yeah.
And that's right. Like that's securing studio time. That's bringing in a producer. That's bringing in, a team to consult on all of this stuff. That's bringing in a songwriter or whatever it may be. So for all of these creators, and to bring it back to music, for all of these musicians, for all of these artists who are, making this, incredible music, which this is the first time in history where people have been able to just do it all on their own, start to finish. Why would you go back to those same people who are just going to charge you to do the same thing and thus forfeit all of your leverage?
Yo, this is such an interesting dynamic when I think about, like, this whole time we've been talking about tech, and like tech is like eating the music industry alive. And it's such an interesting parallel because you have like these young musicians, these young creators, like in the basement, like in their bedroom, in their closet, and they're like making something. Like it just came to them. It's really scrappy. It's agile. They're able to just like adjust to the new sounds. And that's a lot like a startup, if you think about it. Like a lot of startups, they might start in the garage, they might start in the basement, and they're just like, I want to hear this, or I want to see this out in the market. There's a gap. And like, I'm going to be the one to make it. And it's the same thing for musicians, man. So I would say to bring this all home, but we already home with this. Yeah. But I guess full circle with the concept that we're discussing today, what does this mean for the future? What's the future of record companies? And more importantly, what is the future for the creator?
Okay. So I think the future for the artist, particularly, in the environment we're in, is to educate themselves and to be focused on ownership and to really, understand how that IP can sustain not only them, but their posterity, if done right. And there are plenty of examples of that. Otis Redding, which is a family in the state that we work with, a lot of people know that he famously died in a plane crash, but a lot of people don't know he was 27 years old and he owned that jet. Not like these guys today leasing jets and jet doing corporate share jets. And he did that because he maintained ownership of his publishing. And even today, his family lives a very wonderful life in Macon, Georgia, because they own all of his music.
It really boils down to ownership and something as boring sounding as a copyright.
Yeah. Yep.
All you need is a computer, but you do need to know that the art that you're creating, the music that you're creating is valuable. The minute that you create it, it's a copyright. Like that's that.
Bars.
That's it. And that's intellectual property. That's IP. Yes. And it needs to be treated as such. It's a potential gold mine.
Yes. So yeah. So like, what does this mean for the future? Let me just ask this in a different way. Mm-hmm. So in advertising, we talk a lot about like right sizing things, whether that be like ideas or execution. We have to make sure that we're right sizing things so that we can make sure that we can actually pull it off. Mm-hmm. So, and so what I asked my dad in this is like, what does the right size role of a record company look like in relation to an informed artist that owns their music?
Great question. I believe this with all my heart because I believe there is a place for the middleman, because some artists, they don't want to perform all of those tasks or those functions, or they don't have the information or the connections to outsource that, because all of those things they could do. But I think the right size for the label is to be a supply chain. That's all they should be.
Sorry, does that mean distribution?
It means distribution, but I mean, in today's world, it could also mean sync and everything else. You are just a supply chain. So what you should have in your portfolio of talent in terms of executives are people that understand, obviously, the digital marketplace, but that people understand all of the revenue streams for music, live, recorded music. There's revenue stream, performance money that will be coming in from radio, play. There's digital that Sound Exchange collects, have experts like that. They should just be supply chain. They shouldn't be on the side of, let me exploit this uneducated artist from the inner city and he doesn't understand intellectual property. Let me take all of his rights and go exploit those and make all the money. And maybe we'll give him something after all of the bills are paid back. But the artist doesn't know. So right sizing for the artist, if I can say that, would be, again, educate yourself, understand intellectual property, and then you may go to the label and cut a different type of deal. Or you may decide, guess what? I don't need a label at all because I'm looking at Amazon and they're the same company. But when I look at Amazon's verticals, they've got movies. They are in the movie business. They are in the book business. They are in the, you name it, they are in that business. So I could if I'm an artist and I haven't already signed my rights away, then I have to be savvy enough to understand that you should look at all of these companies as supply chain. But from an artist perspective, I think the right sizing is own your stuff, go start a company, go spend $100 and start you an LLC. Even if you want to start a sole proprietorship, go start a business or a holding company. Take everything that you've created and put it there. Now you have a company that has assets, and then you go about making your deals with the idea that these people are supply chain.
So that's a great example, great terminology. And if we look at these right sizing roles, we see record companies as supply chains and two much better looking routes for artists. So the first is that artists have leverage, and that creates better opportunities and more longevity through maintained ownership. Really more of a partnership than an act. So the other lane or the other option is to be independent. And I know that's a word within music that's kind of got watered down or misconstrued. Are they independent? Are they not?
Chance the Rapper. No, Shane. I love Chance.
So, this is kind of interesting ways to look at it. All right, so thanks for rocking with us. This is Tools for Time Traveling. We've been rocking in the past for the most part here, but definitely ready to move things forward into the now and into the future as we continue to look at, what does the future hold for musicians and for folks that are artists and work in the music industry.